Kentucky newsmakers, we're with U.S. Senator Rand Paul running for re-election this year. You've held a lot of town meetings. I know the addiction epidemic keeps coming up. Some local governments say they can't jail enough or treat enough people to deal with this problem. Is there some proposal, is there some effort from the federal government that might be of assistance?
Yeah, it's been devastating. We now have more people dying from heroin than car accidents. And everybody knows that car accidents, are a leading cause of death, but we have more people dying from heroin. Part of the problem is that when you're on heroin, the chemical dependency is so strong that many people just can't quit. And so one of the strategies for getting them to quit is you give them a replacement drug that doesn't cause them to get high. Methadone by injection or another drug called Suboxone. But as we've looked at this issue, we've discovered that the federal government limits doctors and says you can only see 30 patients the first year. The next year you can only see 100. But if you were to look around Lexington and ask how many doctors treat heroin addicts, it's probably very few, by a handful. So there's not enough doctors, so we should not be limiting how many patients they can see. So I have a bill, and there's a reasonable chance we're going to get this passed in the next month or so, a bill that would expand the number of patients that doctors can see to try to see if we can do something to lessen this epidemic.
For military members to be counted in the population counts in their hometowns.
Right.
Would that benefit Kentucky?
Particularly over in Christian County and a little bit in Fort Knox. There are times when Fort Campbell can have 10,000 soldiers gone, but their families are still there. They live, either on the base or off the base. They use the sewers, the waters, the streets, but they don't get counted in the census for that community. So really Hopkinsville might be 48,000 people without the soldiers, but maybe there are 58,000 with them. So we've gotten this passed a couple times, then it gets stripped out. It's, we're still trying. There's a reasonable chance we might get this passed too. We passed it again, and it's now going to conference committee. If it does, we think it would help maybe a Hopkinsville, maybe Elizabethtown, as far as their size and as far as, helping to pay for infrastructure and things like that.
A proposal to more or less take Fort Knox off the grid. This is proposed for several military installations, but you want it done here?
What we want to do is some of them actually have natural gas deposits, the ability to actually get a natural resource that they could use for their energy. And I don't know if it's taking them completely off the grid, but you know how you get some and some of it feeds back into the grid and lessens your need. But it would, I think, lower cost for Fort Knox, save us some money, and I see no reason why we shouldn't use some of the assets that are on our military base.
It's an election year. Your Democratic opponent is the Lexington Mayor, Jim Gray. He says that you squandered much of your first term in the U.S. Senate in pursuit of the presidency and paid more attention to key primary states than you did to Kentucky. Is that unfair criticism?
It sounds pretty partisan to me, but, this first quarter of this year, I think I did more town halls than anybody in America in Kentucky. I've introduced over 300 bills. I've had votes on, several dozen pieces of legislation. And so I would say I've been a very active member. I've, been on the floor defending the Bill of Rights, defending the Constitution, sometimes for hours and hours and hours. So I think ultimately the voters of Kentucky have to judge that. But I've been, even while running for president, made 96% of my votes. And so I've worked very, very hard for Kentucky, but only the voters can ultimately, judge whether they want somebody to defend Kentucky against, big government and the war on coal, or whether they want to elect somebody that will go along with all those regulations.
Are you disappointed that the run for the White House did not work out?
Well, yeah. A little
bit. Senate consolation job?
No, I wouldn't call it that. I mean, I would say that I'm amazed every day to be able to represent Kentucky. And, my desk up there is Henry Clay's desk. So what an incredible history to be able to stand on the floor of the Senate and argue for why we should declare war when we go to war, why we should defend people's right to be left alone. No, all of it to me is just an amazing thing. And I am amazed every day that I get to be part of that debate.
In January, before you left the race for the White House, at the height of the debate season, you called Donald Trump, now the presumptive nominee for the Republicans, quote, a delusional narcissist and an orange-faced windbag.
Did I really say that?
You did.
I really say
and
that?
You made, he made fun of your appearance. He said you didn't belong on the debate stage. Are you comfortable now with him at the head of your party's ticket?
Well, a lot of things get said in the heat of the battle, and the one particular quote you read was from a comedy show, so there was some intention of comedy there. But, you know, we're never completely happy with any candidate unless, you know, it's sort of like, you know, who's the candidate you agree with 100%? Only you if you decide to run, probably. So I don't agree, and I've had some complaints about, you know, different positions, and I'm concerned, and I want to make sure that he'll be part of a limited government constitutional approach to our federal government. So some of that concerns me. But then I look at and I'm concerned that she's not honest. I'm concerned that she's used her position in government to enrich herself. And I think she made really, really terrible decisions with regard to our security in Benghazi. And if you're going to have a commander-in-chief, they've got to defend the country and defend our diplomatic missions around the world. And I think she utterly failed in Benghazi. And really, I think it ought to preclude her from being president.
What would you want to get done in a second term in the U.S. Senate?
The main reason I ran for office is the debt. I mean, we're borrowing $1 million a minute. If we could spend what comes in, balance the budget, and have term limits, I'd probably be ready to come back and practice medicine in Bowling Green again. But we're still a ways from that. And really, there's some blame to go around. When Republicans were in charge of the White House, we doubled the debt from $5 trillion to $10 trillion. Now the Democrats are in charge. We've gone from $10 trillion to $20 trillion. But really, neither party is tackling the real problem. The real problem is entitlements. Nobody's done anything about entitlements. And really, if you want to save entitlements, Social Security or Medicare, you got to reform them. You can't just stick your head in the sand and say, oh, well, everything will be fine. We'll just borrow some more money. Ultimately, it comes to a point where nations can teeter, nations can have difficulty making payments, or you lose the value of your currency. And I'm very concerned about the ultimate foundation of our country with so much debt.
Thank you for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
U.S. Senator Rand Paul, and also candidate for re-election this year. Appreciate you. And we thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers on WKYT. We'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT This Morning, and we hope you make it a good week ahead.